Three women searching for missing Emily Noble found her skeletal remains suspended from a tree branch, kneeling with a USB cord wrapped around her neck. She'd been dead for 4 months, decomposing in the woods just half a mile from her home. Her husband, Matheau Moore, claimed she vanished after celebrating her 52nd birthday together. But prosecutors believed Moore strangled Emily, fractured her face and throat, then staged her body to look like suicide. The jury took just 3 hours to decide his fate. The verdict? It shocked everyone. Welcome back to Dark True Crime. Before we dive into one of the most controversial acquittals you'll ever hear, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this case raises disturbing questions about forensic evidence, expert testimony, and whether a man got away with murder by exploiting his wife's history of depression. May 24th, 2020. Westerville, Ohio, a suburb of Columbus. Emily Noble woke up on her 52nd birthday with plans to celebrate with her husband of 2 years, Matheau Moore. Emily was a Medicaid worker for the state of Ohio, the breadwinner in their relationship, covering both Matheau and his son Joey on her medical insurance. She was described by loved ones as trustworthy, kind, giving, adventurous, happy, and intelligent. But Emily's life had been marked by devastating tragedy. Her first husband had died by suicide in 2011. Her mother had been killed in a car accident. And most recently, in the summer of 2019, Emily's 17-year-old stepson Joey, Matheau's son from a previous marriage, had died by suicide by hanging outdoors at an area park. Emily had been distraught, taking time off work and seeking therapy for depression. Now, a year after Joey's death, Emily was trying to move forward. That Sunday, May 24th, Emily and Matheau started their day by driving to the city of Buchtel to collect water at a local spring. They returned to Westerville, visited the Field of Heroes Memorial, and had a picnic in the park. That evening, they celebrated Emily's birthday with dinner at a restaurant, then hit 2 nearby bars for drinks. Security cameras caught them leaving around 7:30 p.m. Matheau would later tell police that when they got home, Emily was tired. He claimed he decided to sleep in a guest room that night so he wouldn't disturb her if he got up early. That decision, sleeping in separate rooms, would become crucial to his story about what happened next. The morning of May 25th, Matheau said he woke up and Emily was gone. Her car was still in the garage. Her keys, wallet, and cell phone were all left behind. She'd apparently walked out of the house in the middle of the night wearing whatever she'd worn to bed, taking nothing with her, and vanished without a trace. Matheau first called a friend asking if they'd seen Emily. Then, around midday, he reported her missing to Westerville police. Officer Robert Hollis responded, recording body camera footage of his interaction with Matheau. They conducted a walkthrough of the couple's home, observing both cars in the garage, Emily's belongings untouched. There were no signs of foul play, no evidence of a struggle. It appeared Emily had simply walked away. If you've ever known someone who struggled with depression or suicidal thoughts, drop a comment below. Because Matheau immediately suggested to police that given Emily's history of depression and the anniversary of Joey's death approaching, maybe she'd harmed herself. Westerville police launched a massive search operation. Bloodhounds and cadaver dogs were brought in. They searched the couple's condo, the neighborhood, and the western woodline surrounding the area. The FBI joined the search efforts. Emily's family organized volunteer searches, posting flyers throughout the community. But Matheo's behavior started raising eyebrows. According to Emily's family, he refused to participate in the search events. He stopped cooperating with police. And then, in June 2020, Matheau did something that would later seem incredibly suspicious. He appeared on the Vanished podcast to raise awareness about Emily's disappearance. Podcast researcher Amanda Coleman later described the interview as one of the most bizarre they'd ever encountered. Interviewing someone whose spouse is missing, they're in a state of grief, they're in a state of desperation, Coleman said. But Matheau didn't come across that way. Something felt off about his demeanor, his story, the way he presented Emily's disappearance. Months passed with no sign of Emily. Then, on September 16, 2020, nearly 4 months after she disappeared, 3 local women searching for Emily in areas not included on the official search map made a horrific discovery. In a wooded area near County Line Road and State Road in Westerville, less than half a mile from Emily's home, they found skeletal remains. The remains were suspended from a tree branch in a kneeling position. A USB cord, approximately 20 inches long, was wrapped around the neck and tied to a honeysuckle branch. Near the left leg were an engagement ring, a wedding band, and a black water bottle containing alcohol. The body was so badly decomposed from months of exposure that investigators had to use dental records to confirm it was Emily Noble. The women immediately called 911, and Westerville Police Detective Steve Grubbs, who'd been leading the investigation into Emily's disappearance, rushed to the scene. What he and other investigators saw raised immediate suspicions. Yes, it looked like a hanging. But something wasn't right about the scene. At the request of the local coroner, the Injury Biomechanics Research Center at Ohio State University analyzed Emily's remains. Their findings were disturbing. Emily had suffered perimortem trauma, meaning trauma from around the time of her death to her nasal bones and throat. Most significantly, she had bilateral fractures to her hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage, plus multiple facial fractures. These weren't injuries consistent with a simple hanging. These were fractures that suggested manual strangulation and significant blunt force trauma to the face. Westerville police knew they weren't looking at a suicide anymore. This was a homicide investigation. Detective Grubbs sent the case files, lab reports, and images of Emily's remains to Dr. William Bill Smock, a well-known strangulation expert who testified in numerous high-profile cases, including the murder trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. Dr. Smock was a board-certified emergency physician who'd made a name for himself as a forensic expert in strangulation cases. After reviewing all the evidence, Dr. Smock came to several conclusions that he detailed in a report dated May 27, 2021. Emily Noble died by homicide. She sustained at least one episode of manual strangulation. She suffered a quadruple fracture of her hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage that was not consistent with a ligature strangulation like hanging. She had facial fractures caused by significant blunt force trauma from around the time of her death, and most damning of all, her death had been staged to look like a suicidal hanging. On June 17, 2021, more than a year after Emily disappeared, a Delaware County grand jury returned an indictment against Matheau Moore. He was charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count of felonious assault. A warrant was issued for his arrest. The next day, June 18th, Matheau Moore was arrested during a traffic stop in Westerville. As officers placed him in handcuffs and led him to a police cruiser, local news cameras caught the moment. Matheau spoke directly to reporters, his voice calm and measured. "They're making a mistake. This is a mistake. I am innocent. I know I did not hurt her. I didn't do anything." At a press conference that same day, Westerville Police Lieutenant Justin Alloway explained why they'd arrested Moore more than a year after Emily's body was found. "This has been a very, very long journey for all of us involved in this investigation. It took a lot of time and effort of different people. It was frustrating for the family and friends of Emily, and frustrating for us at times, as how long everything took." Alloway revealed that the autopsy showed Emily had multiple face and neck fractures consistent with strangulation. After reviewing all available evidence, the strangulation expert's findings were very clear, Alloway said. He said that this was clearly a homicide based on the injuries that were sustained and the mechanism of those injuries. He also gave his opinion that her body was staged to appear as though it was suicide, and in his opinion, that was absolutely not the case. The case against Matheau Moore seemed strong. Emily had disappeared the day after her birthday, the same day Matheau claimed he'd slept in a separate room and didn't notice her leaving. Her body was found with fractures inconsistent with hanging. A renowned expert said she'd been manually strangled and her death staged. Matheau had refused to participate in searches and had stopped cooperating with police. And his son had died in eerily similar circumstances, hanging outdoors, just a year before Emily's death. Wait, his son Joey had died by hanging outdoors too? Westerville police confirmed to local media that after Emily's death, they'd re-examined Joey's case. They looked at the similarities. Both deaths involved hanging outdoors. Both were initially believed to be suicides. Both happened to people close to Matheau Moore. But after their investigation, the finding of suicide still stood in Joey's case. Joey's death was ruled a genuine suicide, not connected to Emily's murder. Still, the coincidence was disturbing, and prosecutors were confident they had enough to convict Matheau Moore of murdering his wife. But Matheau hired an excellent defense attorney named Diane Menashe, and she immediately started poking holes in the prosecution's case. Make sure you're subscribed to Dark True Crime, because what happened at trial, the battle of forensic experts, and the jury's shocking 3-hour verdict will show you how circumstantial evidence and dueling expert testimony can determine whether someone spends life in prison or walks free. The trial of Matheau Moore began in August 2022 in Delaware County Court, more than 2 years after Emily Noble's death. Matheau pleaded not guilty to all charges, maintaining he was innocent and that Emily had taken her own life while struggling with depression. Prosecutor Mark Sleeper presented the state's case, relying heavily on Dr. Bill Smock's expert testimony. Smock took the stand and explained to the jury his findings. Emily's hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage showed a quadruple fracture pattern inconsistent with hanging. The fractures to her face indicated she'd been struck with significant blunt force around the time of death. Someone had manually strangled Emily Noble, fractured her face, and then staged her body to appear as though she'd hanged herself. But defense attorney Diane Menashe was ready for Smock. She brought in Dr. Heather Garvin, a board-certified forensic anthropologist who completely contradicted Smock's conclusions. Dr. Garvin testified that the fractures in Emily's hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage were entirely consistent with hanging, not manual strangulation. She said Smock's analysis was flawed and that there was no evidence supporting homicide over suicide. The battle of experts became the centerpiece of the trial. Smock was a board-certified emergency physician with extensive experience in strangulation cases. Garvin was a board-certified forensic anthropologist who specialized in analyzing skeletal remains. Both were qualified experts. Both were credible, but they reached opposite conclusions looking at the same evidence. If you've ever watched a trial where expert witnesses contradict each other, drop a comment below. Because when experts disagree, juries are left trying to figure out who to believe, and that creates reasonable doubt. The prosecution presented circumstantial evidence beyond the medical testimony. Matheau had slept in a separate room the night Emily disappeared, so he claimed he didn't know when she left. Emily had walked away without her car, keys, wallet, or cell phone, which seemed unlikely for someone planning to leave voluntarily. Matheau had refused to participate in search efforts and stopped cooperating with police. And he'd appeared on a podcast that researchers described as one of the most bizarre interviews they'd encountered. But Menashe systematically dismantled each point. She argued that Emily had a documented history of depression. She'd been seeing a therapist after her stepson Joey's suicide. The anniversary of Joey's death was approaching, which could have triggered suicidal thoughts. Emily knew the wooded area where her body was found because she foraged for edible plants there regularly. It wasn't strange that she'd end up in that location. As for the jewelry and water bottle found at the scene, Menashe suggested Emily had removed her rings and brought alcohol with her, planning to take her own life. The USB cord? It was Emily's own cord, from their home. She'd taken it with her specifically for that purpose. That's the thing about mental health. Menashe told the jury, countering the prosecution's claim that Emily showed no red flags before her death. You don't see it coming. The defense also pointed out massive gaps in the investigation. Police had conducted multiple searches of the area using bloodhounds and cadaver dogs in the days and weeks after Emily disappeared. Yet, they never found her body, even though it was less than half a mile from her home. 3 civilian volunteers found Emily in September, searching an area that hadn't been included on the official search map. If police had searched that area thoroughly, they would have found Emily's body much sooner, before months of decomposition made forensic analysis more difficult. Testing of the USB cord and other items at the scene came back negative for DNA. There was no physical evidence linking Matheau to the crime scene, no DNA under Emily's fingernails, no forensic evidence in the house or cars, no murder weapon, no eyewitnesses. The entire case rested on circumstantial evidence and dueling expert opinions. The prosecution emphasized that Emily was the breadwinner, earning her state of Ohio salary while Matheau didn't have steady employment. They suggested a financial motive. But on cross-examination, Menashe pointed out that Emily had $96,000 in assets, and the couple's joint banking account had over $400,000, mostly from money Matheau had inherited from his mother. He didn't need to kill Emily for money. They were financially comfortable. Neighbor John Kramer testified that he'd last seen Emily going for a walk on the night of her birthday. But under cross-examination, he admitted he couldn't remember if he had the dates correct because of his age. He later retracted his statement, saying he might have last seen Emily near her garage between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. on the morning she was reported missing, not the night before. His testimony, which should have helped establish a timeline, instead created more confusion. The trial lasted several weeks. Testimony from over 30 witnesses, hundreds of pieces of evidence, graphic photographs of the crime scene and Emily's remains. And through it all, Matheau sat at the defense table, maintaining his calm demeanor, insisting he was innocent. On August 26, 2022, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for just 3 hours before returning to the courtroom with their verdict. Judge Angela C. Duncan asked if they'd reached a decision. The foreperson stood and delivered the verdict. Not guilty. Not guilty of murder. Not guilty of felonious assault. Not guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Emily's family members broke down sobbing, devastated that the man they believed murdered Emily was walking free. Matheau Moore cried as the judge read the verdict, overcome with emotion. Live coverage of the case showed him collapsing in his chair, finally able to release the pressure he'd been carrying for over 2 years. After the verdict, NBC News affiliate WBNS interviewed Matheau. "It's a complicated issue. If you've ever known anybody that's committed suicide, that story, it's a complicated one," he said. "If you're close to someone who kills themselves, I've been there twice, with my son and my wife. It's a very difficult situation to be in." Matheau explained that being accused of murder prevented him from grieving Emily's death. "There's no closure with Emily and me and her death, so it's the combination of being accused of murder at the same time dealing with that. It's a pressure and a feeling that I can't describe. Right when I was found not guilty is when I started to be able to grieve her. So that's why probably I got emotional. That was her more than anything else. I could start the grief process with my wife right there in court when they said not guilty." The acquittal sparked intense debate. Was justice served? Or did a killer walk free because the prosecution relied too heavily on a controversial expert witness? In October 2023, NBC News published an investigation revealing that 3 additional board-certified forensic anthropologists had reviewed the case materials after the trial. All 3 said Dr. Bill Smock had little evidence to support his claims and raised serious concerns about his role in the trial. These anthropologists, who weren't involved in the trial and had no connection to either side, concluded that Smock's testimony was problematic, and his conclusions weren't supported by the forensic evidence. The investigation highlighted a growing concern in forensic science. Experts who testify in court aren't always following accepted scientific standards. Smock was a board-certified emergency physician, but he wasn't a board-certified forensic anthropologist. When analyzing skeletal remains, shouldn't the testimony come from specialists trained specifically in that field? Dr. Heather Garvin, the defense's expert who was board-certified in forensic anthropology, had followed established protocols for analyzing skeletal trauma. The 3 anthropologists who reviewed the case for NBC News agreed with Garvin's conclusions, not Smock's. Dateline NBC featured Emily's case in an episode that explored the controversy around forensic testimony and whether Matheau Moore was wrongly prosecuted or rightfully acquitted. The episode included an exclusive interview with Matheau, who maintained his innocence and explained the difficulty of being suspected in both his son's and his wife's deaths. So what really happened to Emily Noble? Did she take her own life? Struggling with depression and the approaching anniversary of her stepson's suicide? Or did Matheau Moore murder his wife, stage the scene to look like suicide, and then exploit her mental health history to create reasonable doubt? The jury decided they couldn't be certain beyond reasonable doubt. The forensic evidence was contradictory. The expert testimony was conflicting. There was no physical evidence linking Matheau to the crime scene. And Emily did have a documented history of depression and recent trauma that could explain suicidal ideation. But Emily's family remains convinced Matheau killed her. Neighbor Sue Kelly told reporters after his arrest, "I breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't want this to be one of those cold cases that they finally discover the truth 10 years later, only because I knew her. We all did, and we just wanted justice." When Matheau was acquitted, Sue and others who knew Emily felt justice had been denied. Matheau Moore lives in Ohio today, aware that some people still believe he murdered his wife, despite the acquittal. "I know people think I did it," he acknowledged in interviews. But he maintains his innocence and says he's finally able to grieve Emily properly now that the trial is over. Make sure you're subscribed to Dark True Crime, because next time, we're covering another case where the line between suicide and murder was blurred, where forensic evidence told conflicting stories, and where a community remains divided about whether justice was served. Until then, remember that our justice system requires proof beyond reasonable doubt. Sometimes that means guilty people go free because prosecutors can't definitively prove their case, and sometimes innocent people are acquitted because the evidence, no matter how suspicious it seems, isn't strong enough for conviction. Emily Noble deserved better than dying alone in the woods, whether by her own hand or someone else's. She was a kind, giving, intelligent woman who'd survived multiple tragedies only to die under mysterious circumstances on her 52nd birthday weekend. Her story is a reminder that mental health struggles are real and serious, that suicide can devastate families and communities, that forensic science isn't always as definitive as we'd like to believe, and that sometimes the truth dies with the victim, leaving us with questions that can never be fully answered. The case also raises important questions about expert testimony in criminal trials. Should courts require experts to be board certified in the specific field they're testifying about? Should there be stronger oversight of forensic testimony to prevent unreliable science from influencing juries? These are conversations the legal and forensic communities continue to have, and Emily Noble's case is often cited as an example of why reform is needed. Whether you believe Matheau Moore murdered his wife, or whether you believe Emily took her own life, one thing is certain. Emily Noble's death was a tragedy that left a family shattered, a community divided, and more questions than answers. Thank you for watching. Stay aware of the people you love, check in on those struggling with mental health, and remember that justice isn't always black and white. Sometimes it's complicated, controversial, and leaves everyone unsatisfied. I'll see you in the next video.